Why is Paul always upset? What's wrong with Paul? Go on, Paul.
You cannot talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Without
Paul's
also
very cool.
discussing the price of the game. Hey guys, Paul here. Welcome back to APS Amplifier, the secondary APS channel where instead of just playing Yu-Gi-Oh! We talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! And today...
No! No one wants to play the game. So make sure you subscribe to the Amplifier channel instead.
Today, I wanted to talk about the inseparability of discussing Yu-Gi-Oh! Card design, game balance, formats, tournaments, and talking about its pricing and accessibility because this is a thing that affects a lot of players. So I feel like this is especially relevant right now because we are currently in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Format where there are two very defined top decks, Ryzeal and Malice, that people generally actually kind of like. I mean, obviously nobody...
Here's the simple takeaway that people need to kind of like get around, right? Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very pay to play. You don't really get to play meta in Yu-Gi-Oh! Unless you spend money. There have been cheap meta formats. There have been cheap decks that are viable and competitive. But most part, this game is pay to play. There are things you can do to adjust your budget to help you alleviate that issue. But this isn't a like short-term problem. This isn't a new thing. This is something that's been around forever. Or you can just play Master Duel, of course. But I think it needs to change, and I think it definitely like has to have something get done soon. You know, I'm probably gonna make a deep dive video on this at some point, talking about Yu-Gi-Oh's like presence as a card game compared to other card games. But there's a big reason. You know, before it was like Yu-Gi-Oh never really had a competitor. The other competitors were very different, like Magic and Pokemon. Then you had the big three, but now that space is very much losing players to other games. One Piece, Lorcana. Huge competitors to the game that is taking players from Yu-Gi-Oh! That is overtaking Yu-Gi-Oh! In sales that we've seen statistically from the OCG, from their numbers breakdown, from TCG player monetary breakdowns. Like One Piece is doing better in some regions. So this is a thing that's happening and it needs to change. Konami needs to change and needs to do something about this. So this is why this topic is coming up again. I know.
He loves playing against the best deck. That's just a general thing in like gaming, Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever.
Nami will probably just cancel you instead of changing.
Pretty
There's no
interesting
way.
decks. They're surprisingly like well balanced and somewhat easy to play against and all of that.
Brazil!
So people enjoy
Day
the format, but they feel as though the price tag is once again a really big barrier to entry.
Kikus.
Because
Also,
needing
Evil
or just
Twin
feeling like
with
you need
top tier one day. Shout out to my boy Frank for his giant Dante card.
Can Frank send me your giant Dante, please? Thank you.
cards like Molcharmy Fuwalos, and that costs about $70 or $80 right now, or Fiendsmith Engraver, which also costs about $80 right now. You know, feeling like you need those cards to play at the top level can make people feel like they're a bit priced out. But this is actually nothing new. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh's always going to have some expensive card if you look at pretty much any point in the game's history. And it also was sort of relevant to me because I made a video the other week about the loss of the mid-core Yu-Gi-Oh player. A lot of people ended up liking it and resonating with it. A lot of people reacted to it. I was watching some people's reactions, and one of the reaction videos that I was watching was from Joshua Schmidt, a top-level Yu-Gi-Oh player from Europe. He reacted to the video, and towards the end, he was kind of discussing just a lot of the circular nature of Yu-Gi-Oh discourse, the way that, you know, we're always sort of complaining about ban lists or this or that. And one of the things that he cited was the way that sometimes it's difficult to discuss competitive Yu-Gi-Oh or card design or game mechanics or interactions without somebody piping in about the price of the game. I can't afford the certain card, and that's a problem for me. That's sort of why I'm not able to enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh. And
so Josh's take at the end of the video for anyone who did watch the react was basically essentially like, yeah, you know, this is all important. Everyone wants the game to be cheaper. That's nothing new. That's nothing particularly of a hot take there. However, he basically said he's just kind of sick and tired of talking about it. And it's for his personal situation, it's irrelevant to him, which is fair. That's fine. But I think the biggest thing, and I actually posted about this on Twitter earlier, you can't really talk about Yu-Gi-Oh card design and game design without talking about the product design and the cost. I know that sounds a bit weird because it's like, oh, well, what does the balancing of Appaloosa have to do with how much the game costs, right? You can see there's somewhat of a disconnect there. But the reality is there absolutely is a connection between these two things. The way that cards are designed is to make money and is to sell product. So the idea that you can disconnect how Yu-Gi-Oh feels to play from its business aspect is not possible, right? Like it is part and parcel of the discussion. Yu-Gi-Oh cards are so powerful and broken because they have to be sold. If they have to be sold, it means they need to make money. In order to make money, do you see the circle? Do you see the cycle of life of the Yu-Gi-Oh card game? You cannot disconnect this discussion from card design. Power creep is a very real thing, especially in a non-rotation format. So there is no way to remove this discussion of money. It has to be at the center of any discussion about card design in Yu-Gi-Oh. It's important.
And he sort of was a bit exasperated by this. It was also something that a lot of people in his chat were saying was like, well, you know, that's part of the problem, right? Like this game is expensive and can be inaccessible. And so that was just a bit of an interesting tug of war, and it made me want to make this video. So to just address the elephant in the room, Yu-Gi-Oh is an expensive game, if you want to compete at least. Obviously, you can build Yu-Gi-Oh decks for extremely cheap, and nobody's forcing you to buy expensive cards, but on the other hand, if you do want to play at the top level, if you want to go to regionals and you want to go to YCS events, then price is going to become a factor. And I would say that it's just always been that way and going to be that way. Players are the ones playing this game, and the cards have price tags, and so even if it would be nice to be able to talk about cards just, you know, the way that they're designed, just the way that they interact, and just focus on, you know, solving the format, best preparing for events, you can't remove price from that equation, because I feel like that's sort of a lived Yu-Gi-Oh experience, and one that I see so often. So many people, myself included, just kind of can't afford to play the game sometimes, or don't want to spend the money to play the game sometimes, even if they can afford it. So for instance, you know, I made the examples of like the Molcharmy cards or the Fiendsmith cards, but we've had periods of time where even more baseline staples than that, like pot.
You know, not to like beat a dead horse or anything, but the Yu-Gi-Oh player base specifically is kind of aging as well. You know, a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players have played since the very beginning and grew up with the game and are still involved with the game. A lot of us are adults now. We have jobs, we have careers, which means that's great in some way because we can afford the cards now really easily without begging mom for a playset of Tour Guide for Christmas. But that also comes with responsibilities. A lot of us have families. A lot of us have, you know, other interests and other social circles, other things we would rather invest our money in that don't take up as much as Yu-Gi-Oh does. Yu-Gi-Oh is a great, important aspect of your life, but when you become an adult, like your interests, your responsibilities branch out. And so justifying $80 per engraver, I mean, that's not a small number for an adult that has responsibilities and bills.
Pot cards, I think of Pot of Prosperity or Pot of Extravagance, or other just general staples like a Lightning Storm or Forbidden Droplets type of card, is just barred from play. And I think there's an ideal world where, you know, we can just discuss cards on their design and their merits alone. We discuss how powerful something like SP Little Knight is, or how strong a deck Snake Eye might have been last year, or how strong Ryzeal or Malice are today.
Sorry, this is like kind of a random tangent here, but is this true? Do you think Konami should revert back to forcing vendors to cap cards sold at events to $100? This was a thing? Card prices used to be capped at events? Okay, fascinating. I don't think that fixes anything, to be fair, because a card cap, a price cap of a card being like $100 is not really fixing the issue, because like we're talking per card here. And yeah, it's also like not the fault of the vendors. The vendors are selling the cards based off of the economic supply and demand. They aren't trying to like absolutely rinse you for a huge margin of profit. Of course, they are trying to profit, and they are going to take advantage of the scarcity, especially on the Friday of an event. So they do get decent profits, but they aren't like completely scamming. Like vendor prices are within like 15% of like the range of what they're worth, because ultimately the price is set by the supply and the demand. It's really just that simple, you know. If you can find them for cheaper in the venue, you can do that. But ultimately,
Brazil!
Konami capping the card prices, it doesn't help the issue. Konami can cap the card prices by making multiple rarities, increasing the supply to therefore drop demand, to therefore drop the price, right? It's like kind of basic economics here.
And we just ignore the price of them.
Konami
But I
just
feel
doesn't
that price
want
tags
to make
affect so
Brazil!
much of
secret
this
rares
course,
more
both
available,
like
or
in a
full loss
practical
more
way
available,
and also
et cetera,
just
et cetera.
in sort of a sentimental
Thanks for
way
resubs, guys.
for people. So just talking about the practical effects of card prices. Because, you know, cards are printed in different rarities like secret rare and stuff, there's always going to be cards that are high rarity and difficult to get. We know Konami's kind of aware of this. It seems like they typically print the best cards as secret rare. Sometimes there's exceptions. This is old news. But
guys, sorry, I'm seeing like a lot of hate for vendors. Look, you know, haha, Yu-Gi-Oh landlords, we all make that joke, but a lot of these vendors are the exact same people that we saw in the earlier video react. They're store owners who were trying to get by and who are trying to make enough to have the margins to keep their store going. the vendors at YCSs generally are respectable, decent people, okay? I'm not saying there aren't like backpack vendors that prey on kids at locals and scam them for like their engraver by giving them like a super rare, right? Obviously that happens. But respectable, approved vendors like generally are pretty okay people for the most part, and they are going to give you somewhat reasonable value for your cards. They aren't trying to completely rinse you. Of course, they are marking up a little bit on the Friday, not denying that, but the prices that you see are kind of set by the market, okay? They don't just put these prices and slap them on cards out of nowhere in thin air. They have value to them, and they're trying to sell them because that's what they are worth based on the supply at that moment. It's, you know, I'm not trying to like go all in glazing on vendors here, but vendors usually are store owners, and store owners are local card game shop owners that keep the game alive, right? So that's kind of important.
These are going to usually be the cards that they're pricey, and they're just less, like there's just less of them. And so if you go to locals or you go to a regional or you're planning to go to YCS, these price tags will affect like how likely it is that you encounter certain cards. If you are playing at locals, it's probably less likely that every single person has a Fiendsmith engine. And if you go to regionals, it might vary from place to place. A regional in a place like Texas or California, those are some really strong Yu-Gi-Oh scenes, and there are other states that have them too. It's very much expected that like people are going to kind of have the best cards. But I've also gone to regionals in areas where I know that that's not as much the case. Like people just maybe aren't as affluent or just as like committed to the competitive thing in a certain area. And so for that reason, they are maybe less likely to play some of these powerful cards, or it's less likely that every single person in the room has a Fiendsmith engraver. And so, you know, that could affect my own.
If only there was like another format you could play the game and enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh through. If only there was like some other format. And we're not talking about Time Wizards, we're not talking about Draft. But hey, let's popularize Heart of the Underdog one day, am I right? I'm actually very curious. I'd be very curious to know what the format would look like without Ryzeal, Fiendsmith, and Malice. It'd be interesting. Watch a video where a content streamer saying this Japanese OCG card is broken, wait for it to come to TCG and mark it up, profit. But like, you do realize like it's a very cutthroat competitive market, right? Because you can easily say that, but your vendors are competing with each other. They're competing with other vendors, and they're competing with people who are also buying product and buying the cards themselves and pulling them from their packs at tournaments and then undercutting to sell them instantly, etc. Like, so if you're a vendor and you try and sell engraver for $200 on release, one's gonna buy it. Like, you know? So I'm sure they exist, but you're not selling your stuff.
Preparation for the event and my own expectations around the opponents that I face. And certainly if you're going to a YCS, no matter what, you should just, it stands to reason by default that your opponent has access to cards like Mole Charmies, because they would not be going to this event if they did not have some that they could borrow or something like that. There's also sort of a more sentimental thing where I think that the price of cards influences people's feelings around game balance, whether they might be true or not. So for instance, a card that comes to mind for me is maybe something like Evenly Matched. This card came out in, I want to say, late 2017, if I'm remembering correctly, and it's been controversial because it's a very powerful card, or at least was on release. But I think a lot of people's sort of dislike or distaste for it was also because it was a secret rare card and had a really high price tag of like $80, $90, $100, something like that at the time. And so
was it Evenly that expensive?
Opinions of cards are sort of shifted just because they can't afford them. People are suddenly a lot more okay with Infinite Impermanence or Borrelsword Dragon or Pot of Prosperity because these are cards that are useful for their deck. But now that they can afford them, people don't dislike the card so much. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I think in fact it's kind of justified, right? Like if your deck is inconsistent because it's maybe a lower tier deck or something, and Pot of Prosperity helps improve the consistency, but Pot of Prosperity costs $100, and it feels like your deck is only really truly turned on and truly viable when it has access to this card, then yeah, you would almost just start to view Pot of Prosperity itself as a card in just this almost negative light. It's associated with negative emotions. It kind of brings up the thought of like, you know, Konami caused this problem and all of, you know, the best players can afford it because they're all rich and I can't have it. And so, you know, that definitely comes
it was
up.
Evenly the
infamous thing for me.
tweet?
Like I know I might seem like I'm just this Yu-Gi-Tuber who has access to every single one of the best cards. Not the case. When I don't want to spend money on a card, I just don't buy it. I don't have a Fiendsmith engine because I don't feel like spending that much money on the cards. And, you know, different people will have different levels of accessibility to cards.
Same.
I know that for competitive players,
I'd like to buy Fiendsmith when it gets reprinted, but we all know that shit's getting like turbo banned soon.
Is because they are going to get these cards either way. A top player might be sponsored by their card shop or their competitive team, or they just might have a circle of people that they can borrow these cards from if they're going to a certain event. If this person's not going, or they're not going to be playing in the main event, they can borrow their cards, and they have those connections. And so for them, it was never a question of like, am I going to have mulch armies for this event? Or am I going to have, the deck core that I need for this event or this certain staple? That was always a given. So for them, they're able to focus more of their efforts on sheer preparation, sheer play testing, theory crafting, and all of that. And meanwhile, you have a casual base of players who feel kind of left out of that because maybe they wanted to have SP Little Knight, back a year ago before it was reprinted, or they wanted to have that Pot of Prosperity I gave in the example before. And, there's also this concept of budget replacements that has been sort of a big thing, especially in YouTube in years past, maybe not as much anymore. There'd always be like, you can make this video of like, here's 10 budget replacements that you can use in place of like these expensive cards. Like instead of playing, I remember Pot of Desires when it first came out and was like $80 or something. It was like, instead of playing.
Oh, you can't replace. Okay. Oh no, do not say something stupid here. Yeah, so replacing cards is a viable thing that works, right? Like at its peak, people were complaining about droplet and how important droplet was because it was really important. Being able to droplet stop artifact scythe 2 years ago was a massive thing because then your opponent couldn't negate it, right? Because they would usually during Hulk scythe format, people would set up like Baron or Savage Dragon or some type of Omni negate. Hot Red as well, I think, was also played in some of those decks where they scythe you in the standby phase, and then you need the droplet to stop the scythe or call by the grave, etc., etc. But droplet was better because you can't respond to it, right? Like it dodges all of the negates. So that was kind of an irreplaceable card, but you could kind of play Chalice, because not all of the boards were super strong that they had an Omni negate or multiple Omni negates to be able to stop Scythe, but Chalice is an example of a card that you could play instead. There isn't a card you could replace for Pot of Desires. When Pot of Desires was released in 2016, people were saying like, oh, just play Hand Destruction. Like, brother in Christ, what are you saying? Like, no, you can't like replace Pot of Desire. There just wasn't a replacement. It was like, you know what I mean? You just couldn't play that card. Pot of Prosperity, I think, is the same thing, right? You can't replace Pot of Prosperity. You just have to play a different card. You can't replace it like for like. You just have to play more engine or non-engine. You can't play Pot of Prosperity. There's no card like it at the time, right?
Playing Pot of Desires, you can play Upstart Goblin, let's say. But the truth is, this never really works at the high levels of competition.
Lost One or Upstart Goblin? Same card.
Competition. Locally, sure, you can always replace, one thing with another that's got a similar effect. You don't have Forbidden Droplets when it was expensive. Maybe you can just play Forbidden Chalice instead. But the thing is, the way that Konami designs cards is such that the expensive new thing is always going to kind of be better than the budget replacement. That's kind of why one's expensive and like why one's budget, right? An example I like to give is Lightning Storm. When that came out, it kind of offered the benefits of Harpy's Feather Duster and Raigeki. And you could argue that, technically speaking, Harpy's Feather Duster has like a better spell trap destruction effect than Lightning Storm does because you can just use it any time. And Raigeki has a better monster destroying effect than Lightning Storm does because it destroys all the monsters, not like attack position ones or whatever. But the thing is, Lightning Storm offers the sort of best of both worlds and the flexibility. And so when it came out, it was a better card than just Feather Duster or just Raigeki because it could kind of fill both roles and therefore be useful against like decks that use lots of back row, decks that use lots of monsters. I know I'm explaining this example a lot, but I think that it's like really important to sort of establish this. Same with maybe Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence when that came out. I remember in 2018, Imperm came out. It was about $100. People were like, well, you can always just use Effect Veiler, but Effect Veiler has more restrictions on when it can be activated. So again, budget replacements rarely.
Yeah, TLDR budget replacements can work, but you just have to accept that if you're on a budget in Yu-Gi-Oh, you will just be playing with fundamentally worse cards, which sucks. But it's the entire point of the video. You can't talk about Yu-Gi-Oh without talking about the price. It's like, why are these cards in the discussion with the framework of the game design? Well, you have to play Droplet or whatever because of the non-response nature historically in one of those formats, etc. Right? So therefore, you have to talk about price, and for a lot of people, this matters.
Really work in Yu-Gi-Oh, and I think that this also means that.
See, this is an interesting discussion. Mileage playing budgets. So you could look at it this way: if you are like if you don't have a lot of money, but you have just enough to be able to pick up the best deck, and you're umming and ahhing about it. Admittedly, like if you do buy a card that's really expensive, like if you play enough, if you're always at locals, if you're regularly taking part, I mean, ultimately, buying a deck for like $1,000 and then it lasts you like a year. Okay, I'm not going to say that's worth it, but there is a number where you would be comfortable knowing that I can play this for a year and I would be happy with it. Like, there is a number for people there, right? I don't know what your number is, but the mileage there is important. It's like, if you were to be able to just get a full, like, Fiendsmith Snake Eye deck way back when, and you knew that was going to be the best deck that was going to give you the opportunities to play and have fun at the game, for 8 months is with the expiry. Like, what would that number be? Like, would it be 300, 500, 1,000? You know, clearly it is an acceptable number for a lot of people because people do buy decks on day one. So everyone has that number. And mileage is an interesting discussion to bring into this because you are essentially paying for the rotation of using that deck for that year.
Another point I wanted to make, actually.
After playing One Piece 150.
In the interest that people have in new products, because whenever new like sets come out, two things will come up. If it's a mainline set, the big question is, what are the rarities of the cards? We typically know what's in the set already in these mainline sets because of OCG reveals. So everyone's more so concerned with, like, is, you know, Primite Barrel going to be an ultra rare or a secret rare? Okay, it was just an ultra rare. It's going to be a little bit more affordable for me.
No, the expense part isn't from the vendors. I discussed this earlier.
It was an ultra. I lucked out. But then also is, you know, this next new card is Fiendsmith Engraver going to be an ultra rare secret. It ended up being a secret. Oh, darn, it's going to be expensive. Or the Multi-Army is going to be, you know, so on and so forth. And then also the second thing I was going to say about that is, I think this is why there's so much more hype and interest around reprint sets, perhaps more even than like mainline sets, because when you think about like what really gets people like going is the announcement of these like rarity collections. Yes, I can finally get my hands on these cards that came out, you know, last year or whatever, and have just had these prohibitive price tags. That's why people are always, you know, everyone's kind of interested in like a rarity collection or what's going to be in Battles of Legend, what's going to get reprinted in the next Maze set. So I think that unfortunately you just can't.
Rarity collections are goated. They're so good, and the dream is that core sets take on the structure of rarity collection. I feel like they must be making a lot of money on rarity collection. From what I understand, vendors make a lot of money on rarity collection. What if every set was just like rarity collection? You buy a core set, and it has Raizio X in super rare, and you can get it in collector's rare or secret rare, right? Like, people would buy secret rares because they just want it. It's like, okay, I like this game. I really love this deck. I'm gonna get it in ultimate rare. I don't have enough money for Malice, but I want both decks. So I'm gonna buy Malice in full super rare, and I'm gonna buy the Raizio deck in secret, maybe a playset or a single cross I'll buy in QCR, etc., etc. Like, people will do that. Because it's a very aesthetic game. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card games in general, they're very aesthetic. A lot of people play these games because they just really like the look of it, the feel of it, the artwork. People would do that, I think. I hope that the testing ground for Rarity Collection, what have they done now? 3 of them? 4 of them in April? That they will make so much money off of these sets. I'm hoping that they will be able to look at that and think to themselves, you know what? Maybe we can move this into the core set. And that'll, like, basically, I feel like, fix 90% of the cost problems in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Can't talk about competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Without bringing up price, because price is relevant to the players who play the game. It's easy if you have access to all these cards and you're used to having access to them. I really want it. That normal people play the Yu-Gi-Oh! People who do have, you know,
all
regular
arcs as well.
lives,
Great way
day
to, like,
jobs. They, you know, can't always
make
get
chase
the cards. They don't
that
have connections.
Retain value,
they maybe
that
can't
make
afford them,
money.
or if they can afford them, you know, they just. Who wants to spend $300 on a playset of something, or, you know, $500-$600 in an entire deck? Even from the outside looking in, I know like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is sometimes seen as a game that can just be very price gating. And there are also times where I feel like we've come close to that not exactly being the case. Like, so for instance, I think the closest Yu-Gi-Oh! Has come to like price not really mattering is probably just through Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, because at least in Master Duel, yes, there are cards that can be URs, and URs mean you have like dust cards, and maybe you feel forced to buy gems.
What's the most like UR deck in Master Duel?
But at least in Master Duel, every
like,
UR
when we're looking at
UR.
like actual cards you play, and not playing URs for the sake of playing URs.
If you want to get a Multi-Army card or something like that, you can
Branded
still
is up there,
just
isn't
craft
it?
it the same way you would craft any other UR, and then once you have it, you have it. So I think like
Tenpai,
at least
a lot of the non-engine
is
UR, yeah,
focus
and a lot
strictly on like okay, how good is a certain card, how good is a certain.
And Endymion was pretty high rarity as well, wasn't it? Yeah.
Snake Eye and Master Duel, or kind of whatever the top thing ends up being, and so I feel like Master Duel is like sort of close. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all the points that I wanted to make on it. I feel that, you know, this
Hero
isn't meant
until
to be,
tomorrow.
Like, a video that
is Hero expensive?
You know, anti any certain person.
It is, isn't it?
Like, you know,
yeah, Hero was
actually
low-key expensive.
The game as a game absent of price. But I guess I'm never surprised to hear that people are always going to hold negative sentiments around card pricing because it's the factor that affects them and affects their ability to play the best decks, play their favorite cards. Everybody wants to kind of be able to indulge in the top of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame, being able to use the new exciting best cards when they're released, not having to wait 6, 9, 12 or more months for something to get reprinted. It's just a very like human kind of normal player problem. I don't think that's necessarily even like, casual Yu-Gi boomer complaint. I think that's just a player complaint. So the solutions, that more so comes down to Konami. It always does, right? Like, will they implement like a mixed rarity system? Will they finally maybe just kind of shrink the timing between reprints? Like it seems like, we're finally getting certain cards that are going to be in this quarter century stampede, and that's a little bit sooner than like the 10s or something else in the fall. So maybe they're shrinking the window of time on reprints, which is a small step, but it's something.
This is, I think, one of the fastest reprints we've had. Fuwalos was released in the last core set before Suda, which was it is in Rage of the Abyss, which was what dating system is this? This 11th of October? This is 11th of October. 11th of October, and we're getting Quarter Century. Is it Stampede is the next one? Quarter Century Stampede is in April the 11th. So from October, you've got November, December, January, February, March, April. 6 months. Exactly, almost to the date. 6-month gap between the reprint for Fuwalos is kind of incredible. This is one of the fastest reprints we've ever seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! Which is good, obviously. But 6 months is still 6 months, right? Like, six months is like multiple regionals that you could have attended. Hundreds of locals that you would be attended that you just don't have this card in. But progress is progress.
Yeah. And also structure decks. I saw the Blue Eyes structure deck was revealed, and it's got some pretty good reprints in it, so that's solid enough. Yeah, I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. I know I went on a little bit longer than I usually do, but I'm trying to make more of these talking videos because, hey, they seem like they're really popular. People like to react to them. So
yapping, talking. We like talking, Paul.
Streamer, have them react to it. Or, whatever. But also just weigh in with your thoughts and your experiences. Do you feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that you can...
I'm getting called out here. Streamers reacting to
and maybe what are your own experiences with, like, affording cards? Like, do you have a certain... Are you willing to, like, buy the best thing when it first comes out because, you want to play it then and there and you derive your value from play? Do you wait for the reprints? How do you feel about that entire process? It's just because, like, with Yu-Gi-Oh! It feels like it's year over year. There's always an expensive thing. It gets reprinted, but when it does, the next expensive things are coming out. So, that's the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, I have gone on long enough, though, so let me know what you guys think down below in the comments, and also subscribe to APS Amplifier if you don't mind. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers on this channel, so I would really appreciate it, and
holy shit.
I'll see you guys in the next one.
Imagine having 2 channels with 100K. Bro's getting the plaque twice. That's pretty cool. Shoutouts to Paul, always bringing up interesting discussions and and what's the word? Brain's not working. Elucidating the discussion in a very eloquent way, so... can't wait to see the 3-hour reaction to the reaction of the reaction. He did do that, didn't he? I think he went live on this channel and did the reaction. But anyway, yeah. So there isn't too much to say here that hasn't already been reiterated. I think Josh is obviously not the best person to talk about this, clearly, because different investment and different priorities of what the understanding is here. I'm someone who has been pretty comfortable mostly for the part financially over the last couple of years, especially post subathon and stuff. Of course, big shout out to you guys. Thank you. Wouldn't be here without you all. And I would not want to spend that money, and I don't do that because why the hell would you? You know what I mean? That's my perspective on it. I see it and I'm just like, nope, not interested. I have better, more important things I'd rather spend my money on than a $300 engine, etc. But yeah. Solutions, TLDR, the conclusion, in my opinion, is change the structure of product. And if you change the structure of product, I think that does actually have a knock-on effect to game design. So yeah. That's my thoughts.